Hi, this is Laura Tackett with Big Sandy Skills U, and today we're going to talk about the Civil War. So here is a quick overview of the Civil War. We'll look at each of these terms in more detail in a second. The Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1865. It was an internal conflict in the United States. This wasn't the U.S. fighting another country, like the U.S. fighting Great Britain or France. This is people in America fighting other people in America. The two opponents are called the Union and the Confederacy. The Union is made up of 20 states, and most of them are in the North. There are a few that are out West. The Confederacy is made up of about 11 Southern states. There were also 5 states that were called border states, and Kentucky was actually one of those. Let's look what those terms actually mean next. So here's some vocabulary to know. The first word on here is abolitionist. That is a person who wants to outlaw or stop slavery. Think of the word abolish, which means like to stop something or end it. So abolitionist, someone who wants to stop slavery. The word secede, which means to withdraw or leave something. In this case, leave the Union. The Confederacy was the government formed by the 11 Southern states that seceded or left the Union. The Union is the federal government and the states that kind of remain loyal to it. Border states were states that stayed in the Union, but still allowed slavery. The rest of the Union states did not allow slavery. Union made all the northern states, a few of the western states, and those border states like Kentucky. And the Confederacy be 11 southern states. Okay, this is a map of the United States in 1861. The blue states are the Union, and the red states are the Confederacy. The gray states are territories. Territories are lands that belong to the U.S. but are not states yet. The light blue states are the border states, which are still part of the Union, but do allow slavery, unlike the rest of the Union states. So why did the Civil War happen? This is a really complicated question, and I'm not going to give you all the ins and outs, but basically, here's what you should know. From the beginning of our country, the North and the South were very different. They had very different resources, different climates, etc. And it's kind of led to them having different economies. In the North, there are lots of big cities, factories, railroads. The North had a lot of industry. In the South, there were a lot of farms. There were also like really large farms called plantations. And plantations tended to have a lot of slaves to work them. And the North and the South also have very different attitudes towards slavery. This is a picture of slaves outside their slave quarters, their homes. I'm on a plantation in the South. It's like how many of them there were on just this one plantation. So slavery began early in American history, in the early 1600s. However, after the American Revolution, all the northern states abolished slavery. As early as 1804, slavery was not allowed in the North. However, it was still allowed in the South. From the 1830s to the 1860s, there was a big movement to abolish or end slavery in the United States. So why did the North feel differently about slavery than the South did? This is still a really complicated question that I can't completely answer, but you can think about it like this. The South had those like large plantations, those big farms that used a lot of slave labor, and they were very dependent on slave labor for their way of life, and that wasn't true of the North. So there are other things going on in this time period. The United States is getting a lot bigger, and they started out as 13 colonies, but land has been purchased from other countries, and that's making the U.S. bigger. For example, the Louisiana Purchase, that doubles the size of the country. In addition, the U.S. wins land in different wars, adding to the size of the country. So here's a map of the U.S. that shows how the country got bigger by purchasing land or winning it in wars. The brown or tan section is the land won from Great Britain after the American Revolution. The white section is the Louisiana Purchase, bought in 1803 from France. Look at the dates on some of those purchases. You got 1845, 1848, 1846. The country was getting a lot bigger right before the Civil War. So how does this lead to the Civil War? Well, as new land was bought, people moved out west, and that western land was called territories. When a territory had enough people, people wanted to move more formally join the country, and they could apply to the government to be a state. And as new states were added, there was always like a debate about whether they should be a free state or a slave state. So in a free state, slavery is illegal, it's abolished, but in a slave state, slavery is allowed. Now, for a long time, there was like a good balance of power between the North and the South in Congress, the legislative branch. But Southerners were worried that if you have a lot of free states being added and there are like more lawmakers from free states in Congress, then that Southern way of life is threatened, that slavery might be completely abolished. If you are a Northern abolitionist, then you're kind of worried that, oh, if a lot of slave states are added, there are more lawmakers from slave states, and then they wouldn't succeed in abolishing slavery. So Abraham Lincoln is elected president in 1860, and he has promised to keep slavery out of those Western territories. So when he gets elected, many Southern states decide to leave or secede from the United States. A majority of those states do secede, set their own government, which is called the Confederacy, and pretty much when this happens, the war begins. And here's a picture of Abraham Lincoln. So who's going to win the war? Well, the Confederacy has lots of well-trained military leaders and soldiers, and they're willing to fight hard to hold on to their way of life. However, the Union has the industry. They have the factories, they can make the ammunition, the uniforms, the shoes, and they had like the railroads to like distribute these to their soldiers. So ultimately, the Union wins in 1865. And the majority of the battles are fought in the South. And because of that, a lot of the South was destroyed. So the Union wins and the South is in bad shape. So that's a lot of details on the Civil War, but what's important about it for GD? You don't need to know the details about battles and generals, but here's what you do kind of want to know. So in the early to mid 1800s, the US is getting bigger. More states are joining the country. Slavery is still allowed in the South. It is not allowed in the North. And there's like a sharp divide between the North and the South over slavery and the admission of new states. In the mid 1800s, I think 1861 to 1865, you had the Civil War between the North and the South, the Union and the Confederacy. Union wins, and a lot of the South is destroyed. So remember that for the social studies test, don't memorize a lot of information. Most of the questions you see are about your reading skills, not your content knowledge. However, if you don't know a vocabulary word or don't know a little bit of content, you might miss a question. But don't get weighed down by the details. I'm just kind of keep a big picture view. Have an idea of what the Civil War was and kind of why it happened, and watch out for those keywords we talked about. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.